Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm Alec Holcomb, the director of Ohio University's Contemporary History Institute, the organization that sponsored this event. Like so many other positive things at OU, this Baker Peace Conference was made possible by the generosity of the Baker family. That family became involved here in 1945 when a young Harvard professor named John Calhoun Baker was appointed university president. He arrived in Athens with his wife, Elizabeth, who had enjoyed a successful career in the performing arts. John and Elizabeth were deeply affected by the catastrophic suffering that had accompanied the Second World War. And that suffering was brought home to the Bakers by the thousands of veterans who poured into the university at that time. So John and Elizabeth, for the rest of their lives, would zealously promote the cause of peace in the world. And this annual peace conference is but one manifestation of their belief in this cause. So this year's conference examines the state of American power. In what ways is American influence in the world changing? How should we assess that influence? How healthy are key aspects of American soft power, such as the country's system of higher education and its democratic governance? These and other questions will be addressed by the conference's 9 speakers who come from a range of academic, journalistic, military, and diplomatic backgrounds. So our keynote address tonight will be delivered by retired Brigadier General Mark Arnold. He is a highly decorated military leader and an accomplished business executive. Mr. Arnold currently leads full-time fundraising and program management to support Ukraine through the Columbus Foundation. He is also a trustee of Ohio University and a trustee of OU's foundation board. In his talk tonight, Mr. Arnold will discuss his extensive experiences in Ukraine. Few people have looked more closely than he has at the functioning of Ukrainian and Russian forces in that conflict. And Mr. Arnold will be sharing with us some of the ways in which these observations have shaped his more general views about leadership in the world. So would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Dr. Holcomb. Yeah, when I was here as a student, this was Baker Center. So, my remarks this evening are not a canned speech that I've delivered many, many times over. In fact, what I'm going to share with you this evening is the first time that I've spoken about these subjects publicly. Today, I want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, but more importantly, about leadership regarding this war. Because for Ukrainians, this war is not, it's not a headline. It's not a political news story. It's not political theory. It's certainly not a case study in a classroom. For Ukrainians, it is a lived catastrophe that I've seen up close. And wars I'd say more than any other human experience, expose leadership for what it truly is. Its strengths, its weaknesses, and certainly its consequences. Today, I want to share with you what this war reveals about leadership, Russian leadership, Ukrainian leadership, and potentially the leadership choices that could shape Ukraine's future. But first, let me speak from the perspective, I'll talk about my experience because that shapes how I see things. My my combat experience, so 37 years in the Army and Army Reserve. Always in Special Forces. So when I left here from Graduated from OU, I became a Green Beret officer within 18 months of graduating from here. My combat experience, though, began shortly after the 9/11 attacks. 5 months following 9/11, I commanded the 1st battalion-sized combined Special Operations Task Force in Afghanistan. We had elite units, let's call it the SEAL Team 6 Delta Force equivalents from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Germany, Denmark, and Norway as part of this task force. After a year of combat in Afghanistan, I was then assigned to the Special Operations Task Force that had what was called the Iraqi Contingency Mission, the invasion of Iraq. Following that, our mission became the targeting of the leadership of the Saddam Hussein regime. That's what we did. Those experiences shaped how I view combat leadership, along with, again, 37 years of military experience and many years in the corporate world, mostly at the executive level. But the experiences that I'll share with you tonight mostly come from Ukraine. Like this map, just in case you're not familiar with this type of map, obviously you see Ukraine right there in the center. Everything shaded in red, pink is Ukrainian territory currently occupied by the Russians. Areas that you see in the northern edge of Ukraine in light blue were liberated by the Ukrainians since 2020, since the major invasion in 2022. This map illustrates some of the locations that I've journeyed to in Ukraine since September 2022. For those of you who followed this war closely, many or most of these names are going to be familiar to you. 2 spots highlighted in yellow, liberated. Thank God, by the Ukrainians while I was there. And this map illustrates locations where I've journeyed to during my most recent visits, which were September and December of 2025. All 9 of these journeys lasted about a month. And each of these journeys, I spent a little more than half of my time at the front lines, each of the 9 times. All of my time is spent with Ukrainian officers, men who have become my friends, close friends. They serve as my interpreters, my guides, and my access to generals and other commanders in Kiev and at the front lines, and also access to all Ukrainian military training bases. My work there is not military, it's entirely philanthropic. I'm a one-person, unpaid, unreimbursed fundraiser for the projects that I choose to support Ukraine. Working with Ukraine's Medical Forces Command in 2023, I helped the Ukrainians shape a plan. I helped them shape their plan to rebuild their capacity to train their combat medics after Russian strikes had destroyed the locations where Ukrainian medics had been trained at thoroughly for decades. In 2023, then, I raised over $2 million here in America to equip the Ukrainian military with brand new medical education equipment and modular classrooms to teach 32 classes of up to 30 students each simultaneously in 14 dispersed training locations across Ukraine. Those centers train combat medics through their combat medic qualification course in the same 92 skill sets that U.S. medics are trained in. And since mid-2024, more than 14,000 Ukrainian medics have graduated from this very rigorous program. I think they've got about a 70 to 75% graduation rate. One of the most significant results of this program is something never discussed in headlines, and it's the eradication or near eradication of avoidable amputations in Ukraine, which numbered in the tens of thousands. By summer of 2024, when this program kicked off at 100% rate, Ukrainian soldiers had suffered more amputations than the entire British Army during all of World War I and World War II. And 70% of them were avoidable, all due to lack of training by the medics. In addition, I raised funds for new surgical equipment for mobile forward area Ukrainian military medical hospitals, casualty evacuation systems. And for the last 12 months, I focused my fundraising entirely, a little over 1.6 million so far, on raising the funds and equipping the Ukrainians with 160 brand new large engine quad bikes and casualty evacuation trailers. Note that every quad bike driver has got an anti-drone shotgun guy riding behind him or her. This slide is blank for a reason, and I've raised over $2 million for the purchase of non-military articles for the assembly of specialized drones in Ukraine by Ukrainians. Because of these programs, frontline battalion, brigade, and corps level commanders know who I am. They know the work that I've done for their commands, their units, their soldiers, so they grant me access to them and to their staffs and to their most forward command post. That access has allowed me to see something very few outsiders and no retired generals have seen, which are the ground truths of this war, which is what I'll speak of from here on out. So many people imagine the war in Ukraine similar to World War I trench warfare. That image is wrong. These battlefields are far more lethal than the First World War trenches. Forward positions are not large trenches. They are two-person fighting position holes in the ground, strung out along narrow tree lines, and where a town or village happens to intersect with the front, basements. These positions are scattered a depth of 6 to 10 kilometers, these holes in the ground. And that 10 kilometers is known as the gray zone that's occupied by that's held by the Ukrainians. You have to go 10 kilometers from the most forward positions before you see anything that resembles the luxury of a trench in the ground, where there's bunkers, heat, protection from the elements. So the soldiers occupying these most forward positions remain in their holes for 2 to 6 months before being relieved. I know you've heard this in the news, but drones dominate the battlefields. The battlefields have become almost entirely transparent. And thermal cameras on Russian drones make nighttime movement even more dangerous than daytime. Ukrainian movement is isolated to periods of twilight, heavy fog, rain, and snow. The result is a battlefield that I say defined by 4 realities: carnage, death, exhaustion. And after the liberation of towns, atrocities committed by the Russians, with sights and stories that are incomprehensible. I wish I had time to talk about those this evening because these stories remain untold. In fact, I'll just say this off script here. I'll be back Monday. If you want to see a presentation where I've got dozens of photographs and I speak for only 30 minutes about what you're seeing, you'll get the imagery even more clearly, including atrocities that I witnessed 4 days after towns have been liberated from 6 to 12 months, 6 to 8 months of Russian occupation. War strips away illusions. It reveals leadership in its most honest form. Let me begin at home. For most of the 20th century, and this century, probably all the way up to a year ago about this time, America was viewed as leader of the free world. That reputation originally emerged from our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and from the global role that the United States played following World War II. Those ideals inspired democracies in many parts of the world. Today, many international observers would conclude that the United States has stepped back from that role, and a more transactional approach to international relationships has replaced the sense of shared democratic responsibility that once defined the Western Alliance. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, that influences how our allies view and interpret the events surrounding Ukraine. On to Russian leadership now. If I had to describe Russian leadership in a single word, it would be this: rot. Modern Russia has become an authoritarian police state. Independent media has been eliminated or replaced by the state propaganda system. Political dissent has been aggressively suppressed since 2022. Messaging platforms have been replaced by state-controlled apps, and the Kremlin does whatever it can to restrict Western internet access on pain of imprisonment. But the deeper problem of rot within the Russian leadership is corruption. Experts estimate that between 50 and 65% of Soviet or Russian military spending disappears every year through corruption for decades, and especially been worse since the fall of the Soviet Union. When corruption reaches that scale, institutions decay. Leadership becomes insulated from reality, subordinates are afraid to share bad news upward, critical thinking disappears. And the result is a system built on fear, deception, and centralized control. Its citizens are trapped in a system of continuously corroding infrastructure. Putin's invasion of Ukraine was intended to restore Russian power. It had just the opposite effect. Ukraine is now moving firmly towards EU membership. NATO expanded, with Finland and Sweden doubling NATO's border with Russia. European defense spending is on the rise, and Russia has become economically isolated from much of the world. Putin's immensely poor sense of strategy revealed Russia's weaknesses rather than its strengths, and Russian political leadership now needs an existential threat, i.e. war, to politically survive. And Russia's political leadership is entirely reliant on its nuclear arsenal to give the appearance of relevance as a regional or global power. The Russian political leadership's entire strategy currently in Ukraine is to pretend that it does not need to end a war that it cannot win. Nowhere is this leadership failure more visible than on the battlefields. During my travels across Ukraine, I've seen many, many roads lined with lots of destroyed Russian equipment. Not just in 2022 and 23, but even during my most recent visit in December. In one command post in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, I watched live drone feed of over 300 pieces of Russian equipment, mostly armored vehicles, many of them tanks, old Soviet-era tanks, pulled from storage, remanufactured, sent to the front. Over 300 pieces of destroyed equipment since my September visit 3 months earlier to the exact same command post. Russia has lost over 140% of its pre-war inventory of main battle tanks, over 75% of its armored infantry fighting vehicles, or either destroyed or in the hands of the Ukrainians. Less than 30% remains of the vast stores of old Soviet-era military equipment, as witnessed by open source satellite imagery. Putin has taken his primary inheritance, other than his nuclear arsenal, his primary inheritance, which has been this massive formations of Russian military equipment, and just pushed it over a Ukrainian cliff. Total Russian casualties, killed, missing in action, died of wounds, a number you never hear about, or permanently disabled. Estimate 1.6 million Russian soldiers. But perhaps the most revealing comment is something I heard from Ukrainian commanders during my September, December visits along the Eastern Front. So not to exaggerate, at least 8 different command posts, the commander said pretty much this story to me. We know where the Russian general's command post is for our area, but we leave it alone because he helps us. He helps us kill his soldiers and destroy his equipment. So he's safe from us. That statement captures the consequences of failed leadership. Ukrainian military leadership presents a more complicated picture. Many Ukrainian commanders are extraordinarily capable and trusted by their soldiers. Over the past several years, a new generation of Ukrainian officers have begun adopting a Western military principle called mission command. It's a principle where it's an approach, really, of deep critical thinking in planning disciplines, communication disciplines, initiative, decentralized decision-making, and very importantly, trust between leaders and their subordinates. These commanders are often in their early 30s to early 40s. Most have fought the Russians since 2014, and today they command battalions, brigades, and even corps-level formations. Their units perform better, and Ukrainian soldiers prefer to volunteer for these commands. But these leaders are in the minority. Much of the Ukrainian military remains influenced by Soviet command culture. I call it the legacy of Soviet command culture. Centralized decision-making, reluctance to share bad news, and limited initiative among subordinate officers. These officers often fail to communicate with units on their left and right, which has been the primary cause of successful Russian penetrations of Ukrainian defenses during the past 3 years. That cultural divide has consequences. Its frontline soldiers are exhausted. Ukraine has a critical shortage of frontline infantry. I mean, who wants to join a military with that culture? Ukraine's new defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, said on 14 January this year that over 2 million Ukrainian men are wanted for mobilization evasion, draft dodging, and that there's over 290,000 cases, criminal cases, of Ukrainian soldiers deserting their units. Yet, despite these challenges, public confidence in the Ukrainian military remains quite high, extraordinarily high. A December Gallup poll shows that approximately 90% of Ukrainians trust their military, which is like the highest percentage in the entire world. My own observations, me, spending 9 months over 9 different journeys across Ukraine, my observations conclude that many Ukrainian citizens, not all, but many, have a deep skepticism of Ukraine's general staff, military. But they have a deep love for most combat commanders. Confidence in political leadership, however, is far lower. That same Gallup poll, December of last year, 85% of Ukrainians believe that corruption exists in all levels of government. And this is an unchanged statistic since 2014. Only 28% have confidence in their national government. Again, an unchanged statistic over the past 12 years. 74% support a negotiated peace as soon as possible, yet 78% remain skeptical that it could happen this year. Confidence in national political leadership in Ukraine has remained low for many years. Yet Ukraine possesses something that many nations lack. It's the people's sense of self-organization. The Ukrainian government, in my opinion, is dependent on the self-organization culture of its citizens who get things done. When government bureaucracy, corruption, and incompetence just get in the way. Ukrainian volunteer organizations, Ukrainian private companies, Ukrainian charities have played enormous roles in sustaining Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian military during wartime. Ukraine's drone industry provides a powerful example. Much of that innovation in drones in Ukraine and manufacturing capacity emerged not from government direction, but from private initiative and grassroots organization. In many ways, Ukraine's greatest strength has been the resilience and its ingenuity of its people, its citizens. Eventually, this war will end. And when it does, I believe peace may require some painful concessions or difficult concessions. Contemporary history provides an example that may offer perspective. In 1944, while World War II was still raging in Europe, Finland negotiated peace with the Soviet Union, a peace that required painful territorial concessions. Finland surrendered and evacuated over 17,000 square miles of its territory to the Soviets. Unlike Ukraine today, Finland then had no economic help from Europe. It rebuilt its democracy, strengthened its institutions, and ultimately became a prosperous, democratic, stable, and non-aligned European nation. Again, unlike Finland then, Ukraine today has allies willing to help it economically. To achieve that, Ukraine leadership will need government reforms that its citizens already demand. I believe its leadership needs to concede to and actively correct its faults. Ukrainian leadership can either dwell in the past and lament the unfairness of the outside world, or it can pick up the pieces, reconstruct, believe in its own future, eradicating corruption, fostering freedom and social justice, and killing cynicism. That is the leadership choice that lies ahead for Ukraine, in my opinion. I believe after peace is achieved, many Ukrainians, again, my opinion, many Ukrainians would be eager to have another Maidan, a word used in Ukraine that's synonymous with the evolution of grassroots democracy, civic duty, and the struggle against authoritarianism. A peaceful revolution that forces this environment to a reality by voting in new leadership who demonstrated these same ideals in wartime. And those leaders are there now in Ukraine. Before I finish, I want to share one story from the front lines. It's a vivid memory with me. During my December visit, or my December journey across the Eastern Front, right about Christmas, I was dropped off by a quad bike driver at a spot where he picks up casualties. I visited with a small unit positioned along a narrow tree line overlooking open ground, forward position, looking pretty much like what I described earlier. Fighting positions of 2 soldiers and holes in the ground, no bunker system, no trench system, just frozen ground, camouflage netting, and you could hear drones either in the distance or near distance. By the way, this spot he dropped me off at was like the furthest part of that 6 to 10 kilometer gray zone. So not anywhere close to the front. One of the soldiers spoke English, which is why the quad bike driver dropped me off at that spot. I get into his hole next to his buddy, and I asked him a simple question. Why do you stay? He looks at me, thought for a moment, and he's looking back over that open field, which is his area of responsibility, and he said, because my family is behind me. My mother is there, my sister is there, my city is there. He looks at me and said, if we leave here, the war doesn't stop, it just moves to our homes. That young man understood something about leadership that people far from this war forget, or probably never knew in the first place. Leadership is not always about strategy. Sometimes leadership is simply standing your ground during periods of misery, when leaving would be much easier. Across Ukraine today, tens of thousands of men and women are doing just that. They're standing their ground for their families, for their country, for their future. When their country needed them the most, these Ukrainians stood up. They fought, they endured the unendurable. And they showed the world what courage and leadership look like when everything's at stake. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for some questions. Maybe just raise your hand.
Yes, sir.
I guess my first question is, you talked a lot about the rotten structure of Russia and how much that is a limitation on and really has shattered the image of its power. Do you? I wanted to kind of ask for your thoughts on that. By the problems Russia is facing seems like the same problems that a lot of authoritarian regimes in general would face in the military of centralized, top-down control, inflexible, incapable of actually delegating because they don't trust their people and it always has to go to the top and such. Does you feel that that's just likely just an inescapable like trap for being an authoritarian regime in the first place?
Okay, so your question about Russian rot, corruption, authoritarian regime, especially that culture of an authoritarian regime that suffers from rot.
Yeah.
Would any other nation that follows that model, would they have the same weaknesses? Is that your nature of your
Pretty much,
question? Okay. So yeah, definitely yes. Those are the types of countries that lost the Second World War. Those are the types of countries that supported North Korea during the Korean War. And the only reason we didn't overrun them is because we just held back. It wasn't worth it. But yes, I think Russia, the next, call it geopolitical military threat to the free world of that size would be China. And China has an untested military in combat. And I have to believe that the level of corruption in China has corroded the potential for the Chinese military to be effective in combat, at least against a good old-fashioned democratic, loving, world-loving set of nations like the Western powers. I think one big problem that we've had, even when I was a student here at OU, is we completely overestimated the Soviet Union in terms of its military capabilities. Because of that, we did not have a clear view of exactly what that corruption and rot does has its effect on the military. Yes, yes, sir.
I would like just a question. So you provided assessments of like Ukrainian and Russian leadership. But what would your assessment of European leadership be in terms of supporting the Ukrainians?
My assessment of their current support or their capability to support. So European allies, not the United States, correct? Okay, so the question is, what are the capabilities of our European allies to fight a war, say, to materially support Ukraine? I think our European allies, if we can still call them allies to the United States, our own self-doing, they're doing everything they can. But our European allies, this is just me thinking off the top of my head, okay? It's not like deep thing. This has nothing to do with fundraising for Ukraine, which is what I'm damn good at. It's like $6.6 million just for me, but being able to influence Americans who want to help Ukraine. But Europeans, I don't care whether you're from the UK or Germany or Spain or Italy, the Europeans have enjoyed the tailwind of the end of the Cold War. And the military capabilities of these countries is 1/3 of what it was when I was a student here at Ohio University during the 1980s Cold War. So the Europeans, I think, they've gotten used to it. Now, if you're a European and you're in Poland and you're a European in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, or Romania, you got a completely different viewpoint on this. And Poland, militarily, Poland could beat the hell out of the Russians in any fight without any help from anybody right now. Finland, Sweden, same. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question on kind of your medical fundraising. I've heard kind of the Ukrainian fund is shifting away from, say, that critical 24-hour period of medical treatment, more towards, say, a critical week or a critical 10 days, a month. I was wondering if you had any perspective in kind of that challenge in either providing medical supplies or the leadership that it creates to function in that kind of system.
Thank you. That's exactly the kind of question I'd love to answer in front of wealthy Americans, not you guys. People who are capable of making donations. So, the American military during Desert Storm, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, we had what's called a golden hour. Somebody gets wounded, even an IED on a trail someplace. We got a golden hour to get that casualty from point of injury into the hands of a physician, not a medic, a physician. Ukraine, since this war began, has never had more than 6 hours, never less than 6 hours. And because of the density of enemy drones on the battlefield, Ukrainian casualties remain at point of injury 12, 36, 72 hours. So that's why I raise money for quad bikes, because those quad bikes are the fastest means for a brave-ass Ukrainian man or woman to drive that thing and pick up casualties and get them to a physician in an underground bunker where there's some kind of a surgical suite to stabilize those casualties. You come to my Monday presentation, it's at the OUN at noon. I think the OU Rotary Club is hosting lunch. I'll be doing a fundraising. You'll see dozens of photographs of me at these places and Ukrainians doing great things medically at the front lines, including combat medics. But yeah, it's the density of Russian drones. And the fight between NATO, America, anybody, any powers now, that golden hour is gone. I don't care what capabilities you've got. Yes, sir.
The theme of this conference is the state of American power. So I wonder what you would say about how effectively the United States has been using its power, particularly, let's say, in the last 15 months, to affect the combat in Ukraine and to help Ukrainians, for which you have obvious sympathy and for all sorts of good reasons. So tell us about how the United States has been using its power recently, what you'd like to see the United States do to deal with this conflict.
Well, yes, obviously. So the question is, what are my observations on what the United States has done to help Ukraine during the past 15 months? And what should we do? What should we do versus what we have done? I'll back up to the Biden administration. The United States during the Biden administration did tons of things to help Ukraine militarily, with equipment, intelligence, all kinds of training, which they didn't need because our training is not combat tested as like the Ukrainians is. But even then, I was very upset with the Biden administration because the Biden administration did all this without any clear objective. What do we want to achieve? Provide all this military equipment, put sanctions on Russia, but never do enough to push the Russians to make a friggin' decision to stop this war. Over the past 15 months with the Trump administration, look, obviously nothing's happened. All military equipment going to Ukraine from the United States stopped, say, within 2 months of the Trump administration moving in, the second Trump administration. all of the support that the United States has provided Ukraine during the past 15 months has been military intelligence, which I have no visibility on, I just know of it, and selling military hardware to our NATO allies, which they then donate or loan or give to Ukraine. And Ukraine, what it really needs to protect its citizens, if you followed the war over the past 15 months, during this winter, when I go to every visit I've made to Ukraine since at least 23, when I'm in a big city like Kiev or Dnipro, every night, Russian attacks. 3 a.m., look outside your hotel, you see flashes going up into the air of Ukrainian interceptors attempting to knock out Russian cruise missiles every friggin' night, or Russian Shahed drones. So what should we be doing? We should be, in my opinion, this is just the Mark Arnold opinion, and this, by the way, this has nothing to do with fundraising either. I do not talk about this stuff with Americans unless it's one-on-one and they really want to hear my opinion and they want to donate something in the way of 6 figures, which I'll lay it all out to them, is between us and our NATO allies, we have the power to bring this rotten, corrupt rot of Russian military to its knees and bring them and not destroy them, we could, but at least put enough military pressure on them through the Ukrainians by giving them the weapons they need. No holds, no limitations on how the Ukrainians use them. But more importantly, to bring the Russian political leadership to the negotiating table, which they haven't done yet. Ukrainians keep demonstrating that they want peace. They're willing to negotiate with anybody, but the Russians never, not one time have the Russians demonstrated any willingness to negotiate. To do that, the United States is the only country on the planet that can bring the economic power to bear to really bring Russia to the negotiating table by much more severe sanctions. The Trump administration had done some awesome things during October, which was to put massive sanctions on Russia's 2 largest oil companies. And then we stopped. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so first specific question, but then I'm going to make a comment after that, but then just specific question is you alluded to painful concessions. Could you be specific? Does that mean withdraw from most of the Donbass? Because I think that's Russia's non-negotiable that has to happen. Not all of the Donbass, but the major cities, let's say Slavyansk, which is only about 15% of the Donbass is held by Russia. So that's very specific. What painful concessions are you recommending? But I would like to make a comment about your claim about authoritarian governments and winning wars.
Yeah,
Are you a historian? The
claim.
Soviet Union was a highly authoritarian government, and 80% of the German, they took 80% of the casualties. The Nazis could not have been beaten without that very authoritarian Soviet Union. I'm a historian. I would flunk any student who made some kind of claim like authoritarian governments, military. And I'm a historian over vast centuries. That has never consistently been the case throughout history. So just a caution with
Oh, thank you.
the
Well, I am
propaganda.
not. I'm not a historian. I am. I'm not a professional historian. Let's put it that way. I've definitely been a student of history, and what I'm referring to here is corruption. Corruption.
Believe me, I'm a historian. Corruption has been a problem forever since the beginning of civilized societies. There
Okay,
has
the
always
next-
been
the next
corruption.
part of your-
It is not the only factor in
Let him
why
answer,
some
please.
societies win wars.
So the other part of your statement or question was territorial concessions. And I'm not suggesting territorial concessions. What I'm telling you is that is where the Russians are at in terms of their demands, that Ukraine surrender the remainder of the Donbass that it has not already occupied, which is the cities of Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Kostyantynivka. Right there, these three cities that I've been to many, many times, which, by the way, are 80% evacuated now. They're covered by Russian drones. So that's what I'm saying. And there's a lot of Ukrainians in Ukraine who are saying, if that's what it takes, then let's do it. And if that's what it takes to end this war. And there's other Ukrainians that are saying, no way. I'm not making a suggestion one way or the other. It's their call to make. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned several statistics about the trust in government that Ukrainians currently have. I have a couple questions about that. Number one, Ukraine obviously was under Soviet control for decades. Is there an age difference between those who would remember the Soviet Union having far more distrust than the younger people? It's my first question. And question number two is, as Zelensky is far younger than most of all Ukrainian politicians have been, has he been making any strides in dealing with, at least improving the corruption the best he can during the war?
Okay, so I'm not good with two-part questions, especially when they go on for 5 minutes. But the first part of that question regarding like the age demographics of Ukrainians in Ukraine, not Ukrainians here in America. Ukrainian young people, call it age 20 on up, have lived through and witnessed Russian influence in Ukrainian politics since the end of the Cold War, leading all the way up to the Zelensky administration in 2019. So everybody has been exposed to Ukrainian government being very, very Russian-leaning, authoritarian. And the Zelensky government has done not its best, but Zelensky government has done a lot to offset that. That's why they were elected. That's why he won a landslide election. This comedian, this television star. But the Ukrainians, they rose up last summer when Zelensky was shutting down or threatened to, or was in the first phase of shutting down the corruption, call it committee, the anti-corruption committee. And Ukrainian civilians, when I'm over there, talk a lot about that. They're very upset about it. So what was the second part of your question?
You answered that.
Okay.
Talking about Zelensky's
Okay,
works of corruption.
yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, maybe one last question here. We're just about out of time.
Yeah, I guess my question is, how to solve the problem of the increasingly diminishing human resources that Ukraine has? If you look at the army, if you look at the age of the soldiers who are fighting, all the younger people, all the best men, I'm not saying that whoever is currently fighting are worse, but we know it's less and less. People, like what happens next? It's thin, as it is right now.
Are you Ukrainian?
Yes,
Or?
I am.
So the question was about the ever continuously diminishing human capital, people, adults in Ukraine, and what is happening over there and what could happen. And that is one of the problems. This is why people are so eager to have peace. Perhaps at cost. your territorial cost. So I forget the number now. You must know how many 10 million, 12 million people have left the country during 2022. About 10 million out of 50 million. 48 million. Damn. Then of course you've got the casualties, Ukrainian casualties that have mounted up. And you've got a war that just keeps going on and on and on and on and just grinds people. And there's a lot of Ukrainian casualties, which I don't have the numbers on, nor do I even want to know what they are, because I don't want to have to be able to share that with anybody. I'll share Russian casualties and my own observations. But this is not sustainable. And because it's not sustainable from a human capital standpoint, that's why the Ukrainian military, the new Minister of Defense and others have really stood up with the Ukrainian military to try to dehumanize this war and turn it into drone warfare and warfare that does not consume Ukrainian humans, but Ukrainian machinery. So I have been so close to this carnage, and it's affected me, obviously. Like, I have been so close to this and trying to do my best to do what I can to help the Ukrainians, not kill Russians, but save Ukrainians and save arms and legs and eyesight. But it has tainted me to the point where I know that this is not sustainable and they need an end to it. There needs to be an end. Can the America and European allies force it if we wanted to? Yes. Let's just assume that's not going to happen anytime soon. Then the Ukrainians have to make a choice. I hear this hundreds of conversations, same conversation with Ukrainians in Ukraine. Thank you.